Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Dr. Joe Hamlett, and Dave, who's dodging in and out of the screen, is the other co-host. How you doing, Dr. Dave?
I'm doing well, Dr. Joe. Just getting our timestamp. I should have been more prepared.
I guess that's a good call out. All right. Well, so thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the John Sup podcast. For those of you who have not been here or sat in or listened in on one of the podcasts, thanks for showing up. We'll jump right into it. And for those of you who've been here before, know one of us introduces the topic and then the other one gets us going on our conversation. So today's topic is how to take action when you don't feel ready. So, Dave, how can you help our audience get started taking action when they may not be fully prepared?
I'm going to start off with an analogy or anecdote that I'm sure I've said at least a thousand times before in our 200 plus episodes. And that's, you're never really ready to take the first step on something big that you're planning. There's never a
Right.
perfect time for starting school. There's never a perfect time to get pregnant or have a family. There's never a perfect time to get a car, or it's just something that you wind up doing. And sometimes it's just kind of spur of the moment. So it's like buying a puppy, or getting a puppy. It's like, hey, there's a cute puppy, let's get it. So it's just
Right.
that sort of thing. So comes to mind for me, and for us, as we were discussing offline, is why people usually never take the first step is because they're overthinking things. Sometimes that analysis paralysis, as we call it. And we early on in our, I think it's season one or season two, we actually had a podcast titled Overthinking Shit. We had a little bit of fun with that, because sometimes we do overthink things and overanalyze. I found that happening to me in my PhD program. The research, they say, you got to research to the point of oh, I forgot what it's called. I had it the other day and I was going to bring it in, not exhaustion, but where everything starts becoming repetitive, you
Right.
know, and once you reach that point, then that's when you realize, okay, you've got the information that you need. Now you need to start taking action, making a decision. And um, you know, some people confuse clarity with certainty. They have to have all the information before they make a decision, and sometimes that's just not feasible. Getting a
Right.
second or third opinion is important in some things, but to keep on going and getting that 500th and that 10,000th before you make a
Right.
decision can really lock you down.
Yep. Well, and I want to go back to, that episode you touched on the overthinking shit. And you're right. I think for us, overthinking cost us about 4 months of time we could have actually been doing something because, like you said, we were trying to get it perfect. We wanted to make sure it was absolutely correct the first time without thinking about making mistakes or being imperfect for a period of time until we started to catch on. But I think reality, we may be at 240 by now or something if we had a
Right, right.
jumped in and got going. So I just want to touch on that because that was us. So we are definitely sharing something that we experienced because we were definitely overthinking.
Yeah, and
So
it's that point of saturation and that waiting to feel confident before acting. That's where you and I think we're stuck.
right.
We're
Yep.
like, we're doctors, we're professionals, we're experienced, we're coaches and consultants. We have to be perfect. It's like that's never
Right.
going to happen.
Yep.
No one is that perfect. Well, there's
Right.
probably a few people, but.
Well, I think part of it comes with, when you see there's maybe somebody out there doing something similar,
Mhm.
and they make it look so easy, but
Yeah,
we
yeah.
forget, that they had to go through that same process as well to begin to start, and they might have gone through that same process that we did of overthinking, but they
Mhm.
overcame that, or we didn't see the early steps or what it took for them to get
Right.
there. We always see the after, and so I think that's part of it. We have that maybe that model in front of us or
Mhm.
framework in front of us that somebody else might have used, but sometimes we don't take into consideration they had probably had to develop that or get to
Mhm.
that point, and overthinking might have been part of that.
Yeah. Or they might have had a good coach or
Right. Yeah.
advisor to help them move through some of the unknown, so
Right.
they could get to that point where they felt comfortable to act. And some people act quicker, and
Right.
that's not a bad thing. I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, but it's just it is what it is, and we're trying to help clarify that you don't have to wait till you're 100% confident before you do something. We learned that in the military,
Right.
and a lot of exercise. Get up to the top of that hill. What's on the other side? We don't know, but get up there. It's like I'm not so sure. No, you don't argue. You just go up that hill and you see what's on the other
Right.
side. Hope that you're not the first.
Yeah. Well, I think what also comes along with that is, the myth
Hmm.
about that perfect first move, like kind of like we've just been touching on. It's got to be right the first time. There's no room for error, and so with that kind of mindset, we set ourselves up for failure. We get to the point where we don't even want to start, and the again part of that myth is that it doesn't have to be a big action. And we've talked about this before. It can be little baby steps. It's just maybe it's you're struggling to get out of bed, and it's not jumping up out of bed, doing a sprint to the restroom or whatever. It's basically rolling over to the side of the bed, putting one foot down on the floor. It could be as simple as that. But again, we think it has to be this grandiose, action that people see or people become aware of, and it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah, and that's that whole clarity thing again. Like you said, those small steps equal growth
Right.
and progress. So think about the small things that you can do. I remember when I was in the military, we used to have like when we were in the dorms and stuff like that, we'd have competitions on who could do the most push-ups. And I wasn't a big guy when I first went in the military. I was like a buck 40 soaking wet. And so I could do like maybe 50 push-ups. And then
Right.
as I grew stronger throughout my military career, I could do 150 push-ups. And then I
Wow.
challenged myself to doing just 5 push-ups, but it took me 10 minutes to do them. So it's like a minute up and a minute down, and just challenging yourself to do those small incremental things to get better. And that's
Right.
really what it comes down to, is that those small steps equal that motion.
Right. Well, and again, I think people get confused by that they have to be perfect, and the reality is, small movements, uh, even if they're imperfect movements, still add to the next step. The step after that, they get better as they go along. But to you know be hesitant because you're not sure how to
Yeah,
step appropriately is just going to again turn you into that paralysis of not doing anything. So
yeah,
even if it's imperfect, still take that first step. That
absolutely.
gives you data. I mean, it helps you understand, okay, I took this step, it wasn't right. Maybe I need to change that positioning up a little bit, and maybe that'll be better.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, is what that first step really looks like. It's
Right.
maybe you do stumble.
Right.
um,
Yep.
I remember when I was in high school, when I thought I could run. I tried doing a hurdle, and the first time I did it, and it was a little one, it's probably maybe 12 inches tall. I tripped over it and just face planted right on that track, man. And I'm like, well,
Wow.
I guess I don't do that. Maybe I don't do
Right.
hurdles. Maybe I just
Yep.
focus on walking, you know. And it really comes down to that conversation versus a resignation. Like, oh, guess I have to do this. You don't
Right.
resign to do anything. It's a conscious choice. It's that conversation with yourself to say, hey, I know I may not be 100% ready, but I got to at least try. And that's what we did on that first episode that will never
Right.
be, that which name will never be spoken. That we've buried into, it's not even archives. I think we've burned it 100 times in the fire pit in the backyard. We did that first podcast, and it was like, oh my God, that was horrible. So we threw it away as fast as we could. And then we figured out what we needed to do to
Yep.
recover from that. We did a little bit of research, and not this doom scrolling thing and watching 1,000 YouTube videos or shorts or whatever. It's not that. That doesn't build confidence. It's in research with intention. Like I said, find that point of saturation, and it doesn't have to be exhaustive. in some cases. You're not doing a research paper for a college. Well, maybe you are, but if you're not, you don't have to spend years trying to figure out what to do. Sometimes it's
Right.
just finding those few ideas.
Well, and I want to go back kind of just quickly to the small and imperfect movement, and I want to relate it to my son when he was first learning how to walk, and so he,
Right.
so he, his idea was that he's got to be able to walk the first time, and even at I don't remember 14 months or 15 months, he could stand up, no problem, but then when he started to walk he just did this speed walk that kind of face planted him right to the ground. So he would get, 4 or 5 steps in, but it would just, he would slowly decline and hit the ground, and then he'd lay there and cry. And it was because he was trying to make that big impact or
Right.
that big action versus taking one tiny step at a time. And so it took him a few turns, times to learn that. But it just reminded me of that he had to be right the first time. He saw everybody else walking, his older
Mhm.
brother, and he's like, I can do this. But that momentum got him going and right down to the ground. So again, he did that a few times. And then he figured it out that I got to slow down, take one step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, at this point, there's less focus about the outcome. It's just more about the action of doing something, and
Right.
testing those boundaries and figure out, what can you do and what can't you do, and what do you
Right.
need to, like you mentioned earlier, you may have to change and tweak things a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Works.
So, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say that was a little bit of an awkward silence. It was probably 2 seconds, but we're so used to talking a lot.
So, I guess the next thing is, we touched on you don't have to be perfect. That you just need to take some type of action. But how do we reduce that fear without? It's not going to go away. But how can we reduce it? And so, thinking about um, the more we do it with anything, the better we get at managing it, the better we get at controlling it to a degree. Again, it's still the unknown. So the things that you might be seeing might be for the first time, but as you get more comfortable, more confident, more familiar with whatever that process is, it's going to help you to start to minimize that fear. Again, I still get, I'm still uh, I'm not back going back to high school. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't, I couldn't do it. And even today, when I speak in front of groups of people, the butterflies still pop up. But I've learned how to minimize and manage that. So that's again just being more familiar with it, practicing all those types of things have helped me to minimize those things.
Yeah, and like we were just talking about, when we talk about making those adjustments, it's again, you have that goal in mind, but it's that, if that first step seems too big, then maybe it is too big.
Right.
Break it down in those manageable pieces, like we've talked about the last couple of episodes. Make it more manageable. Like you said, maybe it's putting one foot on the floor instead of two, or for me,
Right.
it's getting up off the floor when I roll out of bed. That's my end goal, is to it's the getting my ass up off the floor is my first step for the day. So shrinking those steps for that goal to make it manageable. That the analogy of taking the mountain down one shovel at a time
Right. Yeah.
is really applicable to this scenario.
Well, and I know we talked about this quite a bit. It's just the idea of you start to gain momentum, you start to gain confidence. Again, seeing this overwhelming goal, breaking it down into, and I like to compare this to a ladder that goes straight up, rather than trying to jump up 3 or 4 rungs,
Mm-hmm.
which you think you might get there faster, but taking those one step at a time, and as you continue with that momentum, continuing taking those steps one at a time, you start to recognize, if you turn around and look down, you'll realize you've gone quite a distance. It may not be as fast as that, person that maybe be able to jump 3 or 4 rungs, but I think that leads to the pressure you put on yourself, or not enjoying it, or
Mhm.
not
Right.
celebrating those small wins, which we've talked about in the past. I think that's very important. That again, we take the time to celebrate those incremental goals. Again, not nothing that you can just reach your hand out. Okay, I've achieved next goal, but something that's sustain. Something that means something. Something that is attainable to a degree, not overly difficult, but not easy at the same time. But something that's worth putting in effort and energy, that's going to give you some type of reward that turns into momentum, again, confidence, and reducing that pressure to, be at a certain level by a certain time. I think we intimidate ourselves or overwhelm ourselves by thinking, I have to be here at this date, at this time, and not allowing for any variables, any things that may change that may cause, some delay in reaching that goal.
Yeah, you're saying that, and it reminds me of several case studies from when I was going through school or when I would teach my students. Is that small incremental change in the automotive industry versus the big step up and then flatlining, then big step
Right.
up and then
Yeah.
flatlining. Where's the most benefit from that small incremental change going forward
Right.
instead of those huge steps and then plateauing?
Yeah. So again, this all goes back to developing that plan, and like Dave said, shrinking those goals down to manageable, and not necessarily overwhelming yourself. Um, so let's think about this. What's one step that you've been avoiding because it's too small? Right? What is that one thing that you're thinking? Oh, that's easy. Again, if you think about it, you do that step, then you prepare for the next step, then the next step, and like I said, that momentum starts, and then you look back and you're like, how did I get this far? And it's just by taking those small steps, day in, day out, or whatever the time frame is.
Yeah, it gets back to probably one of the most integral pieces of many of our conversations and the basis of our conversations, and that's that reflection piece, that critical self-reflection, that
Yeah.
that really being, that tough love on yourself to say, hey, what's holding me back? What's really causing this delay, and what can I do about it? I
Right.
mean, sometimes it's simple things like doing chores around the house, getting things done. What's stopping you from getting up off the couch and going over and loading the dishwasher or washing a few dishes? What's really stopping you? And maybe it's overthinking, because that can lead to um, that analysis paralysis, and that we maybe you're just, I guess what I'm trying to say is, maybe you are being lazy, but what's making you lazy to stop you from taking that action to get up and do something small that you can do that's going to make that benefit happen.
Right. Well, and it's funny you bring up lazy because I think that's a lot of times how it can be interpreted, that people are lazy, and it's not necessarily that. It still goes back to that fear of doing something that they may you know view to be wrong, and
Right.
so
That
instead of doing
procrastination
that,
piece.
yeah, and so people just, again, they appear lazy because they don't want to make those mistakes. They don't want to go down possibly the wrong path for some small portion of the time, but that's what it translates to in some people's eyes, that you're lazy. Well, I'm just looking at our clock. We got a couple of minutes left. So, what are your final thoughts on helping our audience to how to take action when you don't really feel ready?
Joe, I think this was a great topic. I mean, it resonates with so many people, and it 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 really does boil down to that overthinking or that procrastination or that fear of
Right.
failure. And you'd mentioned it, and I'm glad you did. It's that part that where you make what's stopping you manageable, and that's really what, in project management, that's what really a lot of things boil down to, is making that project manageable, breaking it down in those smaller actions so you can work
Right.
towards the completion of the project. So I would say I just want to leave the audience with, just take that one little step. What's one thing you can do today that you could that will affect positively impact your progress for tomorrow? Think about it. What is one thing you can do today that you can commit to and execute that will start that forward momentum?
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Dave. Yeah, I won't add too much, but it really still comes down to uh, taking that first step. Like Dave said, whatever you deem as a worthy first step. Like I say, don't cut you know short side yourself by just doing something again that very minimal, takes little effort. Really think about something that will move the needle forward or that will be incremental in helping you achieve your final goal. So, again, we want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. And again, if you know someone who may benefit from this content, feel free to share our links. If there's a topic you want to hear about or for us to discuss, please feel free to reach out. If our information is always in the description. And with that, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.